Hi everyone, in this first in a new series of Talking Bass interviews, I'm going to be talking to the black belt bass player and grandmaster of bass education, Joe Hubbard. We'll be delving into his time at Berklee College of Music and his private tutelage under Jeff Berlin and Charlie Bonacos, and seeing how that shaped his approach to music education. Joe is an absolute giant in the world of bass education, having taught guys like Pino Palladino and Nick Beggs, so it really pays to listen to what he says. I did have a minor tech issue in the first few minutes of recording this interview, so we'll join Joe as he gives us some insight into his time at Berklee. Enjoy!
Berklee was really great for me, and I did 2 years there, and then a couple of teachers said to me, what you need to do is leave and go play, and I like that as well, because these were like, this was a standard thing. This was like, now people wouldn't do that in a set school because they think, hang on a minute, you're paying a tuition fee. We don't want to, they're not thinking like that these days. Those days, they were actually thinking about your career, your direction, what's good for you,
Yeah, it's amazing that, saying that they're going to, like saying,
no,
don't worry about paying.
You've been doing this for 2 years now, and you've got pretty good, but what you lack is any experience, so you got to leave and you got to go play and then come back. And I did that. I left for 3 years, moved to Hawaii, became a professional musician. For the entire time I was in Hawaii, I was a working musician, never out of work one day there. And I kind of rose the ranks in Hawaii. And a lot of people might think like, what the hell's going on in Hawaii? But Hawaii had a great music scene. In fact, there was a band called Seawind that eventually moved to Los Angeles. But I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard of the Seawind Horns with Jerry Hay, Larry Williams, Kim Hudgecroft, Gary Grant. These guys were played on all the records, the Earth, Wind and Fire, the Michael Jackson stuff. And they were like all top session guys. The bass player was a good friend of mine called Kenny Wild. And when I got to Hawaii, there was a thriving music scene. And it was really cool. There was a lot of shows there because you have the tourist industry. So there's a lot of work for musicians and shows. And that's kind of like the bottom rung. And that's where I started. And then I moved up to playing with recording artists while I was there, touring, gigging. I mean, it's crazy. I had a 6-night-a-week gig there playing in a fusion band where we were playing Brecker Brothers covers.
Whoa.
Holiday Inn Lounge. I'm not kidding. I mean, this was common, it was a big scene. And while I was there, one of the guys that was like big on the scene when I first got there was a guy called Ben Ritfield, who is now the bass player with Santana. And he was the last guy who played with Miles Davis before Miles died. And he was like a local guy in Hawaii. And he kind of gave me my first big break because I went to a gig. There was a band that was in Hawaii called Music Magic that played a lot of Chick Corea stuff, and they were like a kind of, very popular jazz funk type band. And I went there and sat in, and Ben Ritfield was there sitting in, and he came up to me and he said, hey man, you'd be perfect for this artist that I'm playing with, but I can't do this gig anymore. And this was a recording artist called Noelani Cipriano. And she had records out and she was touring, and it was a great experience for me. And I did that whole deal over there, and my gig in Hawaii sort of ended after I did a year's apprenticeship. And I use that word because that word has disappeared now. There's no more musical apprenticeships that exist. But in the old days, there were with jazz, and I was put up for this gig with a guy called Flip Nunez, who was a very well-known bebop player who played with he played in the Wes Montgomery's band. He played with Jack DeJohnette. He knew people like Joe Zawinul and George Duke. These guys used to come to the gig and hear us play. and he was originally from San Francisco. He's a Filipino American from San Francisco, and his name was Flip. And I met him when I went to Hawaii, and he had this bebop gig that was like the real deal. It was like hardcore, you know. It was like 6 nights a week, 4 sets a night, and I kind of dragged on his coattails for a few years, and he finally rang me and said, "I need a bass player, but I need you to start tonight." And I quit the band I was in. I mean, literally, I had a gig that night. It was really terrible, but I thought, I've been waiting for this moment.
Yeah,
Quit the band and did the gig, and it was almost like a be careful what you wish for moment. Because I got to the gig, and I was like, oh, great, you know, where's the set list? We have no set list. What? Well, do you have any charts? No. Okay. We'll just tell you what we're playing. Well, half the time they didn't. So it was like, it was trial by fire. I kid you not. And it was just horrendous in a way to go through that. But going through it, and I did that gig for a year straight, taught me amazing things, and you know, just things that you never get from a school, you never get anywhere. And that's the thing, you know, the apprenticeship gig. Like if you were a young guy who got a gig with Art Blakely and Jazz Messengers, if you got a gig with Miles Davis or any of those type of guys, that's what you'd go through.
Yeah.
You know, they would make you go through that, you know, or you would not get through it. You know, you wouldn't stay there, you know, type of thing. So I did that for a year, and then Flip got really ill and bizarrely could not handle the tropical weather. And so he ended up moving back to San Francisco. And I remember the night that was his last gig, and he looked at me and he said, "So what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just going to stay in Hawaii and, you know, gig." And I'd already got a gig with this trumpet player who said, "I want you for the band, you know, after Flip leaves." And I told him, "I'm just going to stay here." And he said, "No, you're not." He said, "People retire in Hawaii." So he said, "You need to go to New York." So I thought, right. My dad always wanted me to go back to Berkeley. So that's what I did. So I ended up going back to Berkeley at that point I went back for another year. And that was a pivotal point for me as well, because the first 2 years at Berkeley, they used to have a 3-number rating system that was like, worked on something like this. It worked like on your overall musicianship, your reading, and your improv. And it was like from 0 to 9. And when I was there for the first 2 years, I think I had like 3 3s. You know, that's where I'd worked my way up to. Mm-hmm. So I still wasn't able to get into a decent ensemble and stuff like that. But when I went back, I had 3 7s. So straight away I could get into almost all of the good ensembles. And then I worked my way up from there, and it was brilliant. And I got to play with, you know, some really great guys, and you know, still have friendships from Berkeley today. People like Stu Ham, you know, was there when I was there. Tommy, what was that guy's name? Tommy Campbell, drummer, used to play with John McLaughlin. He played with Sonny Rollins for a long time. Kevin Eubanks, the guitar player. Kenwood Denard, you know, a lot of people who I was friends with while I was there. And Jimmy Earle, another one, you know, as a bassist, you know, he's a very good friend of mine from Berkeley.
So that apprenticeship really paid off then? So when you went back, you changed as a player?
Oh, totally. And here was the weird thing about that as well. I didn't even realize it. So it really then goes to show as a teacher how to coach your students to when they're going through a period of growth, that you're not necessarily going to notice that much. Even when you really improve, it takes time. It's like watching your hair grow. You know what I mean? Suddenly you wake up one day and say, "Hey, I need a haircut." When I went back to Berkeley, I don't know, it was about a month after I was there, I walked into the bass department one day, and on the cork message board, there's a piece of music paper folded in half, and it just says bass lessons, Jeff Berlin, phone number.
Oh.
So I went, wow, is that for real? Like, is that this guy who's in Bill Bruford's band? And so I took the number down and I rang him up, and he said, yeah, he's come over and we'll do some lessons, And so I had a couple of lessons with him, and I used to see him all the time. And what he had done through that period was he had really kind of given up his place in Bruford's band to go back to Boston to study with Charlie Bonakis. It's just insane, his commitment to music, before anything else. But he was gigging like every night. I mean, literally, there was weeks where I saw him a good like 3 or 4 times in 1 week, and playing with everyone. Mike Stern was a local guy at the time. No one knew who he was, but was doing lots of stuff. And Jeff used to play with him and lots of other guys, So that was exciting, for me. Very daunting, to, study with a guy like Jeff. As a student, you have to realize that to improve continually, you always have to be out of your own comfort zone. Mm-hmm. As painful as that actually is, because it is very painful. And it is, for many people, an ego issue. They might not even know it. It might not be an extreme ego issue, but it's a personal ego issue that they should be good enough that they don't suffer like their other students do. But as long as you're continually growing and working outside of your comfort zone, things are going to suck the way that they should for you to improve. And that's what a lot of guys don't get, because a lot of guys come to me for lessons and they know enough of my philosophy when they get to me. And I usually get the guys as well that never come to me, just that like I'm the first guy they see, they don't come to me. They have not, the guys who come to me are guys who've studied with 25 other teachers first.
Yeah.
Then they come to me. So they already have done some research and they kind of know what I espouse. And so, but even a lot of those guys, when they say, hey, I know what it is. I gotta really get down, go through this hell. And in their mind, they're thinking like, in a couple of years, I'm going to be on easy street. No, you're always going to be uncomfortable. You see what I mean? It's like, that's the way it should be if you want to improve. If you don't want to improve, then that's fine. You know what I mean? But if you want to improve, you can't kid yourself. That's it. And that is that feeling of almost when you're practicing and you just kind of go, damn, this is going to take me a while.
Yeah.
And realize the ring of fire that you have to traverse to get what you want to get. That's almost a feeling of desperation. And so what you have to do is you have to turn that into a feeling of acceptance and know that everyone who you aspire to be like musically, who has gone through that ring of fire, has gone through that same thing.
Yeah. And it's that work ethic, and getting that. I think also a lot of people actually know that when they start. It's one of those things that happens when you start playing right at the beginning, and everybody kind of goes through that. And then I think once they've, picking up speed a little bit, starting to, they've got over things, but then the kind of ego kicks in a little bit. It's like, oh, I can play now, and think, oh, it's all plain sailing from now, rather than keeping themselves in the uncomfortable position, which is kind of how you are when you start. And it's always striving to find that uncomfortable zone.
Yeah. And of course, that's through learning, because we have learning, and then we have, who we are as performers. They're two different things, really. You're artistic, and one of the things that Charlie Bonakis told me, who was a great jazz improvisation teacher, who I'm sure you're aware of, he's sadly passed on now, but he told me once that never confuse your artistic direction as a musician with your career. And that's pretty deep, really. And I didn't get that straight away. That took me some time to really understand the validity of that, because your artistic direction is, regardless of anything, you will still go down that path.
Yeah.
We're kind of in a weird time now with the internet. It has so many positives, as both you and I know. It's like amazing the way the internet operates for musicians, independent teachers. There's so much you could do with it, and you were beholden for people to come to your door to study with you, so it was always hugely limited to what you could do. Now, the sky's the limit in many ways, for this type of thing. And it's I'm very thankful for it. But on the flip side, because for every positive, there's an opposite to that, which is a negative. And on the negative side, you have almost this community of people across the internet. And I only see it in bass players. Maybe it happens with other musicians. It probably does.
I think it happens across.
But I see it only with bass players, because that's all I really pay attention to. But it almost is like this voluntary devolution to like, it's, like it's no longer hip anymore in some circles to be good. And it's kind of like, well, how did that happen? Taste factors come into it. So it's like people say, I'm not that partial to the way Hadrian Freud plays because he plays too fast. I, on the other hand, think, just my opinion, pound for pound, he's the best bass player in the world today.
Yeah.
And he's doing everything as well. Like, people, it's a huge mistake to think that all he does is solo. But because you just see him a lot at NAMM soloing on.
Yeah, that's always the cop-out, and people always say that. It's like, all he does is solo.
But I just saw a great concert of his with Lee Ritenour's band where, he's taking a few solos, but most of it is purely functional, and he was just killing it, like, as the next logical step of Anthony Jackson, and so that's my opinion. People will sort of say that type of thing, but then there's this whole community that's trying to negatively pull it into this kind of voluntary devolution. And to me, this kind of screws it up for a lot of people who are searchers on the internet, because that's what people do, right? If you want to find out about the bass, you type in Google and you're searching around for it. So it's a bit of a shame, but on the positive note, my mission is to change that and make people aware that they have great things ahead of them if they do it correctly. Because it's not just about work, it's about doing it properly. It's not just about hours practice.
I think you're right. This thing with the devolution, I sometimes wonder if there's almost, it's not an illusion, but the way that now with social media, and you've got so many people in such a small area, of the net that you're seeing, I'm just wondering if it's kind of that we just know about it now, that you wouldn't have seen it to the same extent, previously.
That's right. It's a good point. Yeah, but at least. But the thing with that is that, it's the problem with it is that it affects so many people.
I agree, and I think
that's like I saw this thing with Denzel Washington the other day. He started about social media, and he said, "Look, everyone has always aspired to be liked by other people, but now to aspire to be liked by 16 million people."
Yeah, exactly.
So what that does is it distorts the reality of choosing for yourself the direction you want to go.
And also, I think one of the worst things to come from all social media, really, and we've seen this in politics and everything, is that because of the way the algorithms work and the way that they suggest things to you, you're constantly in this bubble of confirmation bias. So you're always looking to suggested videos and things like that. So if there's something that you're kind of comfortable with, you were talking earlier about putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation, but everything that you're going to be seeing is going to be comfortable zone, because you're always going to be seeing these suggested videos that, oh, okay, well, that's the kind of thing I like, that's the kind of thing I like, that's the kind of thing I like, and you're never taken out of your comfort zone when that happens, in an educational sense. I think that that's often the case, and this happens with Facebook. You see it, like if somebody's like, I don't know, right wing, left wing, whatever it is in terms of politics, they're always going to be following these links that are just going to be, working to that confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So my main message is that if you want to be a good bass player, then that means that you want to be a good musician. So you have to be knowledgeable about music.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
I've often said that.
That comes to the forefront, because a lot of people who get into wanting to learn how to play do it for mixed reasons, and then often they just don't realize, they get disappointed when they think like, wow, this isn't fun. Learning is not fun. I remember pointing this out to a student of mine who was a linguist, and he had a high-powered job with a big bank, and he traveled all around. He was very successful, had a huge house, had a bunch of nice cars, and I said to him, look, when you got your degree for your languages, was one part of it fun? And he had to reflect, and he said, no, none of it was fun. But then I had to say, but was the outcome fun? Like, is it fun to be successful? Is it fun to be able to get those jobs that you were going after because you had those qualifications? Mm-hmm. Is it fun to be able to buy that new car? Mm-hmm. Is it fun, being able to add the extension onto your house? And of course, you had to say yes to everything. So the fun part is the results. When you get good, that's fun because it's very satisfying to see that you're getting better. But the donkey work isn't fun. And if it was, everyone would be a virtuoso.
Oh, yeah.
That's
the harder it is, the more benefit you'll get, obviously. That's the key. And I think there's a certain element. Recently I got the, I've just released one of the other side reading courses that I was doing. And I had to be careful with the way that I word it, because sometimes, I was kind of saying, well, it's a kind of simple steps thing. And I think people can often misconstrue that and think that you're actually saying that it's going to be easy or, like you say, fun, when in fact it's like, no, the steps that you take can be very simple in the structure and everything. And it should, you shouldn't be pushing yourself into, too much to begin with, because you're just going to lose interest. But the whole point is that it's not going to be necessarily fun, and it could be quite boring at times. Boring is going to be subjective. Some people find things boring, some people don't. But it's going to be tough. There's nothing worth working towards that's not going to be tough.
And that's relative. So, like, if you joined, we were talking about both our interests in martial arts. One of the arts that we both have an interest in is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've studied a lot of it with a lot of really good teachers. And if you joined a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club of any repute, you would be taught by a black belt who would have gone through, for him to be a black belt in a reputable Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu system, that's not easy. I'll give you an idea. Guy Ritchie is a big Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, and he got his black belt from Renzo Gracie. He's a student of Audra Gracie's in London as well. And he was a brown belt for 8 years before he got his black belt. Yeah. That's the kind of commitment. So, so it'd be like joining a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club and settling for being taught by a blue belt.
Yeah.
Or by a 3-stripe white belt, you know. And that's this kind of new thing that people think as beginners that they don't have to be taught by someone who's any good. As long as they're better than him, then that's okay. But that's a big illusion. And it would be disastrous in martial arts. And I've actually seen this happen because I've taught a lot of martial arts. And I've had students who've come to me who've been taught by people who were basically frauds. And, this is a dangerous thing. When you're thinking about, if you think like, wow, I've got some qualifications in something, and then you realize, God, I can't do anything. It's really important. And a lot of this relates, I have a beginner's base course coming out on August the 1st. It's called the Joe Hubbard Base Foundation course, and there's still some spaces left. This is going to be run as a limited enrollment. And I thought long and hard about this, but as a beginner's course online, I did not want it just to be like, I have a membership site where people can sign up at any time and just follow the deal. Mm-hmm. My other site is like that, but that's structured more at an intermediate level. Yeah. So for the beginners, what I wanted to do is cap it at 25 people. And then through the course, which is 6 months long, they would be getting weekly videos every week. And then every 6 weeks, there would be a live webinar where everyone on the course was involved. And the only way to make that work would be to cap the amount. And I thought, I don't want to have more than 25 people because it's then going to be too hard to personally manage those people, because I want to, in those live webinars, be sure that they are getting the proper feedback from me from being on that course. That will guarantee that when they get through to the end of the course that they will move on. So there are some spaces left, but once that course starts on August the 1st, the doors will be closed until January.
That's really interesting. That I kind of, because I saw it, I saw it on the website, and I was thinking of it as a course in the standard, like everybody releases courses, but it's not really a course. It's in that conventional sense. So it's more of almost like having it's like Skype lessons, almost like having personal lessons with you, but over a 6-month period.
Yeah. I mean, it is weekly lessons that are pre-recorded and are delivered, but specifically for beginners and specifically for this particular course. It's no old videos of mine or siphoned through. It's all brand new material. And then, of course, they get all the sort of support material in worksheets and PDF, downloads and all that sort of stuff, backing tracks, etc. And then every 6 weeks, they join on to this webinar. And then all those webinars will be archived as well. So, occasionally when we do this type of thing, as you have a guy in Australia that just that day couldn't get up early enough or stay up late enough to join on to that webinar. So all those webinars will be able to be watched retroactively as well. So that's kind of cool. But I'm really hoping that most of the group can be live with me on all of those, because there's going to be 4 of those webinars leading to the very end. And I think that, I think that I think that'll be pretty successful in the idea that the people who join on will really advance to an intermediate level within that period. And the way that it kind of works is that a lot of people would say, well, 6 months is too little for that to happen. And they're kind of right, mostly. So the way the course works is I'll be running the course twice a year. So it'll be run in August, and then it'll be another group will run in January. And then it'll keep repeating as long as I keep getting people that want to do it. But what happens is that when you join, you get access to everything for a whole year.
Right.
So the objective to when you complete the course is that you haven't really completed it yet, because now for the next 6 months, this is the action plan that you need to implement to then review and revise and really hone all of these skills that you've learned. So by the time the year's up, then you're ready to go on to maybe an intermediate program.
And is this starting from absolute basic, from absolute beginner, or is it sort of, just...
Well, here's the thing, with bass players is that even a lot of guys who've been playing 13 years, they're really big. There's many who are actually making money to do it, are beginners. I know this from 30 plus years of teaching, and teaching some very big names along the way, who, you kind of thought, wow, that you would have thought this guy would know a little bit more than this, but they don't. And so the thing is that, there are going to be some people on it that have been playing the 13 years. I like to call those guys the guys who've been playing 1 year 13 times.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? And they never really improved, but, they just kind of played and did it, and they never really learned much. And so that's a particular kind of beginner, okay? There's another beginner who's really just getting started. So it's really for both of those kind of guys. It's not for the guys that are kind of, more advanced beginners who are intermediate students. Oddly enough, for advanced players, this is a good course to do. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a whole host of people that now want to teach, because the industry, it's it's out there now to enough people that the industry isn't what it used to be. So there's a lot of guys who are trying to supplement what they do as bass players with teaching, who can't teach, who never were interested in teaching. They were only interested in their own development. Some guys who are really good players as well, and they can't teach. And this is a great course for these guys because it will show you how to teach a beginner. It shows you the psychology, it shows you the material, and so you can get onto that. So it's really for those two streams of beginners that I spoke about, or advanced people.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I never thought of it like that, but it's true. When you reach a certain level, I mean, there's so many people that are super advanced players that just completely forget what it's like to be a complete beginner, because it was so long ago,
Yeah, and it's also, they're not interested in it. They're only interested in their own development.
Yeah.
So it's like the typical guy who will teach. He'll go and teach a 1 hour master class, and he will teach the students everything he knows in 1 hour. So that's where my thing is like, you come and do this and you learn how to teach a beginner.
Yeah.
You would learn how to do that at the end. And as a beginner, hopefully you would advance to the stage of intermediate. Thing is going to take some work from those people. As you know, it does take the work. I mean, you have to put in the time to do it, but it doesn't take 10 hours a day.
No.
It doesn't. It doesn't. If you can practice 1 hour a day, but know what you're practicing, know how to practice, know how to control the actual mental depth of what you're doing, then you will be able to then control your own practice sessions. This is
quality
a big point.
Quantity, yeah.
This is a big point, this idea of understanding the mental depth of what you're doing. Because a lot of students, they want to be led by the hand so much that they never do anything that is for themselves. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they never actually learn to problem solve the actual things along the way. Yeah, so, a lot of what I do with my lessons is I will I have a real good roadmap. Anybody who studies with me will get everything mapped out for them. This is exactly what you want to do. This is how you want to do it. This is when you want it. It's very clear. But the problem with that sometimes is that I have to remind these guys, hey, you got to do the work too. So in other words, a lot of these guys might think, well, hey, yeah, Joe's got it all here. I just have to be a zombie and just take this in. No, you've got to actively problem solve and understand the mental depth of what you're doing. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you go to a lesson and someone teaches you, first lesson, I teach you a minor seventh arpeggio. So here's a C minor 7 arpeggio. And in the first lesson, they explain to you, that, here's the arpeggio, and it's that you got a root, a flat 3, a 5, and a flat 7. And then here's the way that you can play it over your bass. And suddenly you're being shown 5 different positions to play that C minor arpeggio all over your bass. And people would go, oh, I know what you're doing. You're doing inversions. No, I'm not. I'm just showing you all the notes of the chord all over your bass, and then how to organize this so you can segue from one position to the next. Yeah. And that's the first lesson. So already the perception of depth has widened because that guy before probably saw a YouTube video where they said, well, here's the root, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, and then you could maybe start that with your first finger or your fourth finger, and then that's it.
Yeah, the box shape.
Yeah, that's it. And then they never learn the notes. So the next week, the guy comes back, and you say, okay, yeah, how'd you get on with that? Okay, you did really well. Now let's learn it in every key. Now, when we learn it in every key, we have to understand what all the notes are. The idea is that after a short period of time, the mental depth of what you're doing becomes huge, but you're understanding everything.
Well, it ties in with what you were saying about, learn music, not bass, learn music.
Yeah.
It's obviously a lot of this is back to the Charlie Banacos thing, and Jeff Berlin talks about this a lot as well, doing all the chord tones and all that stuff, which brings me to something that I've been dying to ask you about, because you've got your book out, the Chord Tone Sudoku, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, man, that looks great. So what is it, the Chord Tone Sudoku that you've got?
Well, Chord Tone Sudoku is basically, it isn't really that big of a revelation in a sense, but it's kind of a cool way of organizing and learning your chords. Basically what it is that you would see a box, okay, which has, sort of 4 columns going down and then 4 columns going across.
So just like normal Sudoku.
So it looks like on the when you just look at it, it looks like a Sudoku box, you know? And so what happens is that on the diagonal line down, okay, so if I put to the far left in the first top row, if I put like a C, okay, and then follow those squares diagonally down the actual square, right? And then just put a C in each one of those. So basically what that's representing is that if I look at the top row, and let's say we're doing minor 7th chords, okay?
Yeah.
Look at the top row, C would be the root of what minor 7th chord, and then that's going to say C, but you're going to fill in all the notes. So you go C, E flat, G, B flat, right? So then the second one you go, well, I don't have the root given to me, but I have the 3rd given to me.
Oh, I see. So we're going down each horizontal one. We're going to be able to see 3rd and then 5th and 7th.
Exactly. Okay. So then you see C and you say, well, that's an A minor 7, and then you fill that in accordingly. Then you see C as the 5th, so you say that's an F minor 7. Then you see C as a 7th, and then you say that's D minor 7. Okay,
so that's a great little exercise.
Yeah, it's a great thing. Now I've been doing that for years, and at some stage when I, had these sheets with, the boxes on it, with the different chord types, and I gave it to one of my students, and he said, "Yeah, this is just like Sudoku."
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, that's kind of cool, and I called it chord tone Sudoku. Getting back to the whole thing about beginners and really just bassists who are trying to learn, the single biggest thing that most every bass player that I've ever taught doesn't know is the notes on their bass. They do not know the notes on their bass. Not fully, not in a way that is accessible to them. Yeah. And it's so important to get that down. And of course, I came up with that exercise years ago. Documented it in an article in Bass Player magazine. I think it was 92.
I remember seeing it. It was one of those exercises. I was like, man, it's a lot tougher than. And a lot of big players have sort of complimented me on that recently when I was at the Warwick Bass Camp doing some teaching. Kai Eckhart Kappa, came up to me and said, "Man, I saw that random note finder, and I now make all my students do that. And if I do a master class, we all warm up with that exercise." Yeah. And he said, "I personally do that when I first pick up my bass because I feel it helps me connect to my bass." That's Kai Eckhart. He played with Tom McLaughlin. Yeah. But do you see how that sort of attitude? Yeah. He's a seeker. He's going to always grow. Just in case people don't know what we're talking about, if you just describe the note finder exercise that you've got.
Yeah, the random note finder exercise is basically you start with your lowest note. So if you're on a 4-string bass, you'd start on a low E, and then you would proceed to play all the E's on that string, and then progress by going up all the strings. You play all the E's on your E string, you play all the E's on your A string, all the E's on your D string, all the E's on your G string. And the way I like to teach people to do it is to ascend, going all the way up, and then come back down. And then you would then move to the next note, which is F. And now there's 2 points where we have the natural half step. So if someone was learning this for the first time, I would have them just learn the E as its own note and the F as its own note, but and the B and the C in the same way. Yeah. But as things progress and they get better, they would want to learn the enharmonics of those notes as well, because and as much as people will argue about that to the blue in the face, until they actually learn that knowing that in context to different things makes it a lot easier. Like, for instance, if you see an A flat minor 7th chord, it makes it a hell of a lot easier once you really understand the theory and how that connects to your bass and how it connects to the harmony, that 3rd is a C flat. You see what I mean? And it's the same, D flat minor 7, you have, that would be the flat 7. So, or an F flat as the 3rd. Yeah. But initially people go, I can't handle that. So initially I'd say just learn as E and F and B and C. But all the other sharps and flats is that you learn both of those. So when you go up, learn the F sharp, and when you come back down, learn the G flat.
That's why learning the spelling of chords and scales is, I think, really, really important with that, in terms of the actual spelling of them, because that's when you really do realize why double sharps, double flats, all the enharmonic equivalents, why they're there, in context.
Sure, but here's the thing on double sharps and double flats, because there's a little asterisk that should be placed on that subject to me. The theory part of it, I believe everyone should know. I do. Like, you should know that on paper. You should know that in your head. But when you are applying that, just alter that to the natural note that exists. Yeah. As
on a performance basis, especially, because it's just going to cause problems.
But with just a flat or a sharp, I think that should be ingrained for your performance. So if it's a C flat on an A flat minor 7, don't think of that as a B. It's easier to think of it as a C flat.
Yeah.
But once it becomes this double and double sharp and double flat, and I've quizzed quite a lot of famous people about this subject, and they all seem to kind of do it that way, you know. So, and I mean famous, reputable, like virtuoso musicians, not like guys who are just famous.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like seeing a C diminished 7 and seeing it as, is it a B double flat or an A? You know, it's
exactly. And really, you're converting that to an A. You know, and so you know that's like I think that's kind of important. But you know that knowing the notes on your bass, it's not easy, and it's hard because it's a hard instrument, and this is what makes it hard to read on, because you suddenly have all these duplications of pitches, and it becomes this question of like, why would I want to go here rather than here?
Yeah.
And it's part of really mapping and blueprinting the instrument. And here's the other thing about reading music. And you know, I saw the fact you had your course out, which I think is really great, you know, because a lot of guys on the internet don't really promote reading because it's a bad, you know, it's a sort of bad word, you know, it's like it doesn't.
It's a hard sell, yeah.
Doesn't sell as many things. Saying that, my reading book has actually done really, really well, but you know, it's the thing about reading that is often misrepresented is the way people, and it's the way people think about how they're going to learn it. And it's the way many teachers tell you to learn it as well. Like, for instance, there's a whole bunch of guys that will say to their students, oh, you want to learn to read? Well, that means you've got to read for 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a big stack of books. And if you don't read through that, well, that would be the same as me saying I wanted to learn to read Japanese. And I was just going to put pages on the music stand trying to read the Japanese. And just because I did it 3 hours a day and maybe occasionally, you know, had a dictionary and was trying to decode this thing, but never actually went and learned to a class where I learned the language, learned the letters, learned the words, you know, learned the grammar. I'll never learn it. And it, you know, it makes perfect sense. Anyone listening to this that would hear that analogy would say that makes absolute perfect sense. You'd be a fool if you were learning how to speak French, not to learn it properly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you never really learn it. Well, that's the way you want to learn to read music. And here's the dirty secret. There's a lot to reading that doesn't have anything to do with reading. It has to do with learning how to play, actually, technically, and the content of what you're doing. I'll give you an example. How many guys do you know? Because you've been, like, I know you read, and you know, you obviously read quite well because you've done a lot of things. How many guys do you know that say, okay, as bass players, they say, yeah, you know, I'm a pretty proficient reader, and they could handle, you know, the average gig. They could probably handle going doing, you know, sort of average cabaret top 40 thing would be pretty okay to them. But then someone put Donna Lee on the music stand and said, could you read it? Not can you play it at tempo, not can you play it like Charlie Parker, just can you read it? How many of those guys would say, whoa, can't read that? I have to work that one out. Why? Because they don't know the content. So whatever it is that you don't know, you won't be able to read it. For instance, if you're reading English and you come across a word that you do not understand, I don't care who you are, you will do one or two things. You will read over it and assume you understand what it meant. Or you will get out of it, you will stop, get a dictionary and look up the meaning.
Yeah.
And then hopefully try to work that into your vocabulary, right? Because that's the way we learn. So let's say you had a paragraph where 40% of that paragraph, you did not understand what the words were. You're not going to do very well by reading that paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's say that, you know, you go through school and you learn and you're kind of, you know, we're not like Rhodes scholars or anything, but we did pretty well on our English exams, and we did our book reports every week. And, we actively read books, on holiday, we'll sit and go through a few books by the pool and stuff like this. And we've got no problem doing it, read through the papers and everything. There's that level of reading, right? But what happens if you have an audition where you have to go and do an announcement spot where you have to read off of an auto cue to an audience of 10,000 people?
Yeah.
The level of reading changes, right? Now, you might be able to read those books fine, but doing it under that kind of pressure.
Oh, I've described that
You know what I mean?
in terms of what can seem, you can be given a part, for, you're playing with whoever, and you put yourself up on stage, and let's say it's a collar part or something like that, and maybe the sort of keys playing, and then you're about to come in, and it's just going to be you and the piano and the vocals or whatever, and everybody's sat there, and it's a really quiet, number, and then you've got to come in on those notes. You could just be playing semi-briefs, whole notes, something like that, and just that one note can just seem like so much more pressure than playing, like Donna Lee, for instance, because there's a lot of stuff going on. People will forgive you if you screw up on a fast lick or something like that, but just that one note can be so much more difficult than ever playing a tricky line,
The thing about that is that, and that's a good point. I was the first step in the show Chess when it was in the West End at its height with Elaine Page.
Yeah.
And Martin Elliott was the bass player in that band, and he appointed me as the first step. And I can't remember how many shows I did in that first year, but it was about 90 shows because he was touring all over the world. Wanted to keep his gig and then dep it out, you know what I mean? But that show, man, was hard to play, and I knew it. The thing is here's the thing: I knew the show because I spent 3 weeks learning every single note on it.
Yeah.
But under the pressure of the show, you have to follow a conductor, all the electric bass, because it was in a pit. They couldn't get a double bass player in the orchestra. So the electric bass had to do all the arco parts with a volume pedal.
Right, okay.
And there was loads of effect stuff. He had a big pedal board, and there was lots of effects, chorus and octave divider and all that. So there's so many things going on around you with this. And in that show as well for the bass, it was a 3.5 hour show. And the bass was the guy who played the longest in the whole show because there was rhythm section parts, and then there was orchestral parts, and then there was combined. And the electric bass played through all of it. Yeah. Because I was playing the double bass parts.
You should have paid more for that.
So it was 3.5. Well, the money was good, actually. It was really well paid. But a lot of that was just whole notes, you know what I mean? And you had to play those with accuracy. And, if you bended anything like that, you would have been out. I mean, it was
getting the eye from the conductor.
Well, it was a very high standard for that show. When I did that show for the first time, because I went and watched the show about 6 times, sitting next to Martin in the pit, he had said to me, through that period, he said, look, I got to tell you, like, if you turn up and you make one mistake, you're not going to get this gig. And he
That's
said,
pressure for a start.
Yeah, he said, look, the thing is, we've had quite a few guys come in, name guys, who just didn't take it seriously enough. And they sort of messed up a lot of it to make it, just not that tight of a show. And there's too much at stake here. It's got to be perfect. So I thought, okay, I'll go for it. I had 3 weeks to learn it. I had a tape of the show. I had seen the show 6 times. I thought, there's no way I'm going to go in there and prepare it. And I did. I knew everything. So and a lot of things in that show that they would have like ostinato grooves, like in 7 or something, and they'd have it like kind of it'd have the groove written, and then it'd say like 62, and to mean repeat 62.
Yeah. Counting along.
And so, you're sitting there counting 62, and then it'd have the simplest, like, little one bar insert, like, da, 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 and then it goes 78. And it had literally pages of this because they were all like little conversational things on stage.
Yeah.
The cast, when it was doing those little ostinatos. And what happened was just before the finale of the whole show, I played the show note perfect. One of the hardest things about that show was the page turns. So I had two conductor stands on where I was sitting. I had everything mapped out, as you do and prepare it. So I had minimal turns. Even still, I had some turns with that because there was some 15 pagers. I would just, ditch the old chart on the floor and go to the next one. I was just focused, man.
Got a pile of paper on the floor.
Yeah, a pile of paper, the last piece, leading into the finale with one of these sections, and I lost my place. You know what I mean? So what happens was, no, I'll tell you, I lost it, but the reason I lost it was because the chart fell off the stand. So the chart falls off the stand, and I'm sitting there going, da-da-da, da-da-da, and I'm looking, Mitch Dalton is on the left of me, top ace session guitar player. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me like, you're fucked. So the thing was that I had to make an executive decision. I thought the finale's coming up. If I pick the music up, I might drop some bars and there'll be something, but I'll be able to make the finale. The finale was one whole page, and it was really like halftime, grandiose kind of thing, and had lots of runs and stuff in it. And I thought, I've got to do it. So I stopped playing, picked up the music, put it back. Mitch counted me into the bar we were on, did it, played the finale, and the show ended. I came off the stage, and I was packing my stuff up to leave.
Red-faced.
I was packing up to leave. And Martin came back. He came and watched that show out in the front. He came back, and he said, he goes, yeah, that was great. And I said, yeah, but I guess I got to go now, And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I dropped those few bars. And he said, no, it's not that type of mistake I was talking about. Right. He said it's like major stuff. So I took that seriously. And I think that, that's the kind of thing when you're a musician and you're doing those kind of things, you do need to take those seriously, because in some circles that would have been it. It depends on who you're working with. But
and just
going
on for nearly 2 hours now. Just lastly, one of the, I had to mention this. Obviously, one of your early students was Pino Palladino.
That's right.
How was that when you first met him?
Okay, that was an interesting thing, and really, I guess, just pure kind of happenstance of the way that it happened. I moved to London in 1980, and or maybe it was 81. It might have been at the end of 1980, like December or something. And anyway, I started playing around town and getting a little bit of a name for myself. And I thought to myself, I should do some lessons to kind of, supplement my income here, and put an ad in Melody Maker magazine. Just put a thing in there that I had gone to Berkeley and that I was teaching bass. And Pino was the first guy who called me. The first guy who rang, Palladino. Yeah.
First student over it.
First student. And he had just joined Gary Numan's band, and they were working on that album called I Assassin. And before that, he had done some stuff with the Squeeze, and he was doing a few little things with Jules Holland, But, he sort of came over and he said, I said, well, can you play something for me? And he said, well, yeah, I'd like to play this Anthony Jackson line off of a Harvey Mason record it was a Harvey Mason record called Funk in a Mason Jar. And the tune was called Fantasia. And it's one of the rare tunes that Anthony soloed. And he said, I've transcribed this by ear and just thought I'd play through this. And I thought, well, I've got the album. Why don't you just play along with the record? He said, great. So we put it on and he plays along with the record. And it's like, no, perfect, and he plays like Pino, he's great, So I said, okay, I'm not trying to be funny here, but what do you want to learn from me? And he said, well, thing about it is that what I just played, I don't really understand why Anthony played that. And I want to be able to understand how to take that and plug that into anything that I learn, and anything that I want to play on, and I thought, great. And so I said, well, look, you need to learn something about harmony.
Yeah.
So we spent about the next year and a half going through harmony and some jazz improv stuff. And he was a great, diligent student, and in that time, he recorded all that Paul Young stuff, that he became famous for. Yeah. And I remember him telling me the story when he came over once and he said, yeah, I've been working with this guy, Paul Young, and we've just finished this record and they've shelved the whole thing because they can't figure a way to market it, and they put one single out, it didn't do anything. So they shelved that for a whole year. Wow. And that's when he was with Gary Numan playing. And then, he ended up coming back off the road. He left Numan and they released a Paul Young thing, Wherever I Met Hat went to #1. And he told me that he was, from that point, booked 3 years solid in the studios. But we've managed to stay friends for years, and he's a great guy. And Pino is a very modest, he's such a cool guy, such a beautiful guy, He's like a Libra, like he just gets on with everyone, He's just an amazing person, and he would never blow his own trumpet about anything, It's just the way he is. And so there was some, I think, interviews that came out where some people said, do you read music? And he said, no, I can't read. And then people kind of came back and would say, oh, you see, Pino Palladino, he doesn't read. But let me tell you something, he can read. It's just that when you ask Pino Palladino, can he read? He's going to think, hang on a minute, who are the people that I look up to as reading bass players? Okay, Anthony Jackson, Nathan East, Neil Steubenhouse, Jimmy Johnson. These are the guys that can read anything. These are the guys that will be hired for the Academy Awards because there's one look through and then it's live and you can't screw up. And that's very coveted, that group of people, So he knows he's not that guy. So he'll say, no, I don't really read. But he can't, but he actually can.
Yeah, I kind of thought that might be the case.
There's a a concert, a Princess Trust thing that he did with Pavarotti and Clapton and stuff. He's got a music stand with charts on it. So a student of mine, Andy Creamer, as well, did he did a dep for Pino on a project that Pino was involved in, and he told me there was a pad, and Pino was looking at this music throughout the time he was with this band, doing the project that he was doing. So he can read, but he's just not like an amazing reader, and people don't hire him to come and read a chart.
Yeah.
They hire him
for what he brings, for being Pino. Yeah.
Yeah, for what he brings into it. So, but yeah, but I taught a lot of other well-known people as well, and for a while, really in the first year that I was teaching, virtually everyone that I was teaching was well known, like people like Nick Beggs, Mickey Fiat, who was playing with Dave Gilmour, and Tina Turner, Paul Jackson, who was the bass player from Tapao, not the Paul Jackson from Urban Hancock. So that's kind of like, where I made my start with teaching, was teaching guys who were pros, well known, pros, like Pino and Mickey Fiat and Nick Beggs, so. But
described you as the grandmaster teacher, black belt. Well, that's brilliant, that, Joe. So where can people find you? So is it Joe Hubbard Bass?
Yeah, joehubbardbass.com, and go there. Subscribe to my email list, and you can get like a free book there, which is pretty cool. And then on the site, you kind of can navigate everything and look at all the different things I have to offer. And just bear in mind that bass foundation course for beginners, but also applicable to advanced players to learn how to teach beginners, is going to be starting on August the 1st.